Welcome to this film in which we describe the discovery of a Saxon burial and a Roman hoard and many centuries of life on the land, including an unexpected need for explosives. All happening in 3 fields near the hamlet of Walcot, just outside Charlbury, which is a small Oxfordshire town towards the eastern edge of the Cotswolds. Rob Jackson in the field Spring Peace, I think
Spring Peace Field, yes, that's right.
And it's August 2021. We're going to take you back 40 years, if we can.
40 years.
To July 1981, when you were ploughing this field and something quite unexpected happened.
It did, and it caused a bit of commotion at the time because it was quite a large stone in the field, very large stone. And it was actually damaging a lot of implements, so they decided that we'd have a look at it just to see if we could see what it actually was. And so we had a machine into the field.
A JCB or something like that?
It was in those days, it was called a drop. It was a caterpillar crawler with a good bucket on. Yeah. So we started to dig round and came across some bones as we went round it, and I was with a work colleague and we looked at it and we said, well, that's a human skeleton.
Yeah.
So we didn't quite know what to do, so we got on to the farm manager and he said, he come and had a look. He said, I think we better report it, just because we don't know what how old it is. So he reported it, and then the police came and had a look at it.
What did they say?
Well, they couldn't make it out, but after they had a good look at it, because it was actually, this skeleton was buried in a crouched position, so we all thought it was older than, it wasn't a fresh body or anything like that.
No. And was it just the bones, or was there other stuff with the bones?
Well, as we sort of scratched round it, and it was, we actually found a dagger and a spearhead as well. Right. That was had been buried by it.
Right.
And also there were some smaller bones. They looked like children's bones.
That were a bit separated from
But they were just separated a little distance from where this actual stone was.
Okay. I think the spearhead and the knives are in the Charlbury Museum.
They are,
also
they are.
The bones of what turned out to be a child burial.
That's right.
And the first skeleton, the more or less intact skeleton that you found, and we have a photograph of it in situ, was identified by the archaeologists as Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, it was pagan Saxon according to the test, what they did.
Yeah. So you were driving a big old Massey Ferguson on that day. Do you reckon?
Yeah, at the time, the farming was a little bit different to what it is today. The stuff was starting to get bigger, the equipment, machinery getting bigger. But it was still done in a traditional way.
Was this big field now still divided into smaller fields at that point? Can you remember?
This was, in my time, where we are now. This would have been. There was 5 fields, I think it was, which went right up to the edge of Witchwood Forest. It's a big area. So I think this is not quite 100 acres, this whole field at the moment.
Okay. It's a massive field, isn't it?
But it's a big field.
And it's just had the barley harvested.
That's right.
There's lots of straw.
Yes, it certainly has, yeah.
And we think that at the time you were ploughing in 1981, there was probably a change in use of the land from pasture to arable.
Yeah,
Is
I think it was
right?
laid down to a grass lay, and at the time, Walcot farm had a big dairy unit, and of course the grass was all produced for the winter feed, for the silage for the cows. And I think what we'd done, we'd had the silage crop off of here, and then ploughed it up for a wet crop of winter wheat.
Right.
That's what, as far as I can recall, that's what had happened.
And that's why your ploughing came to uncover something that had lain there.
Yeah, that's right.
For 1,500 years, 1,600 years.
You know, we always were having a bit of trouble with this spot and doing a lot of damage to implements. You know, in those days, quite costly, but that's how it was.
You did eventually sort out the cause of the problem, why you were breaking bits off the tractor.
Yeah, but the actual stone where we are now is still there. It hasn't been moved.
No, okay.
It's still there.
We think we're standing on what was the...
So we could be still standing on it. It never got moved. It was too heavy.
No.
We couldn't move it.
But the bones and the archaeological materials were taken away and looked at.
That's right.
Good. I mean, that was a big event in terms of your farming...
Well, it was.
Farming career, really, or your life on the land.
Yeah.
Did anything else happen, not like that in your... How long were you working on the land here? You've known these fields since you were a lad.
I worked for Cornbury Estate for quite a few years. I worked for the Rotherwick family for 22 years.
Yeah, and before that?
And before that I worked for Oliver Watney.
So that's the previous owner of Cornbury?
The previous owner. And I worked for him for a few years, started working in the early 60s for Watney's.
Okay. So that's a real life on the land, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I did, and that was my life. I mean, it was... it's not a job, it's part of how you're brought up and how you go on. I mean, my family were in farming, a lot of them on my granddad's side. All farm workers.
Yeah.
And probably followed on from that, really, you know.
Yeah.
Still interested in it now.
I know you've got loads of stuff on farm machinery and tractors and stuff. But
yeah.
But the next generation, I mean, in your family, the next generation is not working on the land.
No, my son's he's a carpenter and joiner. My daughter was a hairdresser, and now she's a professional dog walker. And
okay.
Yeah.
And that's part of a change. With the change in the agricultural practice, with the larger machines and so on, far fewer people work on the land, obviously.
They do.
When you started working for Oliver Watney in the 60s, how many people worked the estate fields?
On the farm, actually, there was 3 of us on the farm, but we didn't have the actual land that the estate has got in hand at the moment. I think we farmed 200 acres, which in those days was quite a lot, but it wasn't a big farm.
So there were 3 of you for 200 acres?
Because most of Cornbury Estate's land was tenanted out to tenant farmers.
Right.
All the farms. Look, Walcot Farm this is about a 300-acre farm, and in my time it was run by Mr. Roy Green.
Yes, Mr. Green. Yes. Yeah, we'll visit that in a moment. So Rob, we're now in a smaller field, 14 acres compared with the 100-acre field we've just been in. Although smaller, this itself is a field amalgamated from 3 that you would have remembered from your early days here. One of the fields was called the Horse Ground, is that right?
That's right, it's always called Horse Ground in my time.
And that's because of the farm behind us, Walcot Manor Farm?
Yeah, probably, because you know, it would all they would all these farms would all use horses and right up into well, what we call modern times. Farmers still had a few horses around that they were using with the tractors. You know, tractors as well. Tractors had come in, but the horses plodded on. But the last person I can remember that was a carter here, his name was Jack Woodward. And he worked for Roy Green, and he was carter for Greens. And also, he worked on a lot of farms around here. He was a day man as well. They called him day men. And he'd come in different seasons, whatever the crop was. In those days, potatoes, sugar beet, mangels, barley, wheat. And he'd work on the different crops. And then when they'd finished potatoes, he'd go on to another farm for potato work. But I can remember him, a good old boy.
And I think I remember Joe Woolley saying that as a lad during the war, one of his jobs was to let the cart horses out onto the horse ground.
Yeah, he did. That was Joe's job, I can remember him. And he worked for Roy Green during the war. He would have been a young lad then. But it was a bit before my time. But as I say, he would have definitely worked with horses with greens.
Yeah, yeah. We find a lot of horseshoes cast
in the
paddock.
You do, the old big cart horseshoes. And some of them still got the nails in, haven't they? I expect you've found one or two.
I have found a few. Yeah. But I've also found these things which reflect on something else that was done in the farm here, I think. Do you recognise, it's called dry cow? Do you remember that? I
think that is what they used to put in the cow's teat when they had mastitis. That's what I think it is. But,
you're exactly right. It's an early antibiotic called fluoxacillin.
That's what it is.
And it's made by Beecham's probably in the 1950s. And I found two of these where we're standing, really. So the milk bottle top, the treatment for mastitis in cows.
That's right.
It was a dairy unit in its time, wasn't it?
It was. At Walcot we had a dairy unit. In my time, there's 100 milking cows here. One cowman, and then he had a relief milker for his days off. But it all was run by Cornbury Estate. But in those days, they had 3 milking herds on different farms, and this was one of them.
Where were they pastured? Where were the Walcot cows pastured?
They would have been in this field. They would have been on the cricket ground field, round the cricket area, where the cricket field is now, that you can see. The field opposite this picket peach field, that was all laid out for cows, and the Barley Close field, which isn't there anymore, and the Shepherd's Barn field, that was laid out for the dairy cows as well. They were all grazed in paddocks. They strip grazed paddocks, moved them in, strip grazed them in to one day, and then moved them in the following day onto a fresh pasture.
Okay.
And then that's how they rotated it round. Milk them twice a day.
Right.
As well.
And now, I think since the early 70s, these fields have been intensive arable.
That's right.
And
it's changed to arable use now.
Which meant that some of the archaeological remains where we're standing had to be bulldozed flat, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. We've been talking about the old Saxon warrior, and of course the actual Walcot village was actually behind where we're standing now. And it was, in my time, early days, I can remember it was quite a circle, but it got levelled out as time went on. But you can still see traces of it now if you look back to where we are. It's still there.
Yeah. I think in the 14th century there were something like 17 huts here. The hut platforms were still such that you could see them in the 1970s, and Tim Copeland drew a map recording their position in this field.
I believe he did, yes.
And they all got levelled. Now he also used to field walk here and found quite a lot of Roman pottery. So the Romans were here, clearly, as well.
They were.
Yeah. You had a nice thing that you said one time we were here before. You said nobody really owns this land. It's ours to look after for a while.
That's right. I mean, you're only the keeper of anything, I think.
Yeah.
Nobody owns anything. They're just the keeper of it.
When you think we're standing where there were Iron Age folk before the Romans, the Romano-British, the Anglo-Saxons,
yes, that's
medieval
right.
people.
We were, and of course, we're near the River Evenlode, actually, and in the Evenlode Valley. So they settled in those areas, didn't they?
Yeah.
For water, for the main thing.
Can you remember, you mentioned Roy Green being the tenant farmer for many years here in Walcot.
Yes.
How long was he there?
I'm not sure. I think he must have taken it on just before World War II, I think, but I'm not too sure. I got a feeling there was a farmer called Edgington's that had Walcot before Roy Green. Marlin Edgington, and I think he moved to Spelsbury.
Okay.
But Roy Green was at Walcot in all my youth days, growing up as a lad. He had Walcot Farm. I think he retired in 1969, I reckon he did. But he was a mixed farmer. He had something of everything, beef, cattle. They had grazed a few sheep here. He grew potatoes. He grew sugar beet. And of course, having the Charlbury station here, see, all the farms that had sugar beet in the area, they used to get transported to Kidderminster, where the sugar factory was.
Ah, okay.
And that was big. It was a big business here, but it's all gone now. It's different crops are grown now.
Would the milk have been taken to London, or on the train?
It was in the time of the cows. You had milk tankers. There was no churns. I have, in my time of farming, we used to have the milk churns picked up off the milk stands, but that wasn't the case here. It was all it was run on like a herringbone system and bulk tankers. Okay. So you had a bulk milk tanker pick the milk up from here.
You mentioned the churns. I think in Montabot's Lifting the Latch, there's a description of bringing the churns from Enston to the station in Charlbury.
That's right. They would have done, yeah. And of course, old man worked for Taffy Hughes, the shepherd.
That was a before your time, but not
I can remember he lived in Biddy's Bottom in Fulwell.
And still, there's a plaque there now to commemorate that.
Yeah, that's right. He's a good character.
Yeah. So, anything else you remember about life at this field, the life of this field and the farm, Mr. Green and perhaps Eddington before?
Yeah, well, I mean, at one time, this where we're standing here, this small field. I mean, Cornbury planted its strawberries one season.
Did they?
We had it planted strawberries, and they had a pick your own
really
little setup here. But it didn't last. But it was here in this end of the field.
All jolly fellows who delight in being mellow, and attend to me now and sit easy. For a pint when it's quiet, come on boys, let us try it, for its thinking will dry.
We've come 200 yards up the bridleway from Walcot Cottages, which you and I both know well. We both lived there, raised families there, which is great. We've come to an area, again a large field. Part of this field where we are now was known as Walcot Park.
That's right, this was Walcot Park, and I seem to think that it was, at one time, it was like Cornbury Park is to Cornbury House. It was the park to Walcot House, and it was a lovely situation. But it's cropped as arable fields now. There was a big wall that went all around this area as well, like a big park wall. It's all gone now, but it's nice to talk about it. Just imagine what it was like.
And we think back to the 18th century when the Jenkinson family had Walcot Manor Farm, or Walcot Manor. The Jenkinsons went on to have a son or grandson who became Lord Liverpool, Prime Minister at the time of Waterloo.
Yes, he did, that's right.
Yeah.
So, he became Prime Minister and lived at Walcot House.
Indeed, and it was quite a grand house in those days. We can imagine the nobility.
It was because you can still see even now if you go round and you see the trace where they had a bowls green there, and even before his time there was some fish ponds there, which you can still see the outline of them.
Well, I think there's still water in them actually, and some of them anyway.
Yeah, they were all kept even before that time, back into the more or less Middle Ages when it was a monastery there, and the monks used to keep the carp in there.
used to belong to Ensham Abbey, didn't it?
That's
which was
right.
a monastic
so it goes back quite a long, long time.
Yeah. So in your time, though, you can remember the parkland. You can remember behind us, in the dip there. You can remember trees.
I can remember a bit. There was a big clump of trees right in the middle there, and it was they were taken out of. Wow, we're talking about 50 years ago that I was here, and it was before then. I can remember when it was actually done.
And way back before that, Grimm's Ditch, which is a rather mysterious embankment.
Yeah, and you'll find now if you went down to that area in the trees down there that the old Roman Grimm's Ditch, that they call it, it is still there. It comes up as far as the corner of the field.
And that became relevant, perhaps particularly because a couple of years ago, metal detectorists working with permission on the field behind me, one of them found a collection of Roman coins from the 4th century, mid-4th century, copper coins.
That's right.
50 or 60 of them now being evaluated in the British Museum. And the fact that they were deposited as a hoard just up the hill from us, on the skyline behind us, may well relate to this structure.
It is very possible that that's what it was all linked to.
Where the Roman coins were found, perhaps a bit mysteriously, there are fragments of wood that were found close to the place where the hoard had been deposited. Probably not part of a wooden case in which the coins had ever been kept. But I think you know why these fragments of wood might be there.
Well, yeah, it's quite possible I do, because, like we were talking earlier, these fields were a lot smaller than actually they are today. And there were hedgerows and elm trees. And during the 70s, early 80s, you got the devastation of Dutch elm disease, where a lot of them died, and of course they had to be removed, and they got cut down. And the roots and the big stumps of a lot of them did got exploded out of the ground, and they blew them up. So that is possibly the remains of the roots of the elm trees. That's what I think.
Right.
I could be wrong. Well, but I think I'm on the right track.
Nobody's come up with a better explanation why there are these fragments of wood.
I think, Rob, that's how it was.
Yeah. So it's the exploded remains of the roots of.
I can remember when they were blown out.
must have been quite a day. Which is a nice thing, because you bring me to talk about the furthest tree we can see here, the beech that's on the top of the rise there, which Joe Woolley always used to refer to as the King Beech.
Yeah, he did, and it was amazing really that people used to carve their names on there, and they used to put little odds and ends at what they'd done and what the dates were, what year it was, and if they had a girlfriend who they were with, and that's how it was, and that's how the stories revolve around that old tree as well.
Yeah, it was certainly a major part of the landscape.
It certainly was, and it's still there. Look, it's still on the landscape now.
Yeah, it sheds branches, but it's still going.
Yeah, it is. It's lovely.
And it's to be hoped that someday someone will plant another beech in its place.
Well, it's possible they will, and as things are going, it would be nice to see some more trees planted along here, won't it?
It would be. It would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Long life and success to the farmer. Come sit at my table, all you who are able, and I'll hear not one word of complaining. For the tinkling of glasses all music surpasses, and I loves to hear bottles a-draining. I have lawns, I have bowers, I have fruit, I have flowers, and the lark is my morning alarm. So jolly boys now, here's Godspeed the plough, long life and success to